Thank you very much for the invitation, Sarah Diamond and Emery Petrov, who invited me to speak today about the AGA. The Art Gallery of Alberta, for those of you who don't know, is the oldest cultural institution in the province. We were founded in 1924, and this is the building as it looks today. We underwent what was, I think, a first significant transformation in 2010 with the opening of this new building, which was designed by the Los Angeles architect Randall Stout. It is an 85,000 square foot building right on Winston Churchill Square, and we also have another secondary facility, which is our collection storage facility that's about a few kilometers away. I want to start off with some kind of a bad news story, kind of like my colleague Gideon did. Many of you may have gone through a new building project. Many of you may have just opened one, like my colleague Jessica from the Polygon, who's here today. But here's a little attendance graph to show you. This basically shows what attendance was like in our old building in 2004, and then the opening of the new building in 2010. I realize that actually the left side is gone, so that number at the top, that spike is about 250,000. And then as you kind of proceed, the year following it dropped, the year following it dropped, and then we kind of went into this little bit of a dip going into 2015. It was this dip that predicated a lot of the work that we began to do in terms of looking at the gallery, our exhibitions, our programs, how we operated, what we did, and how we related to the community. The one thing I don't have a graph of, but it's very interesting to note and to look at, is that there's also a very interesting bit of data that shows us that on our free days, days that we are open to the public, with no admission, our attendance skyrockets. So we can have between 4,000 to 10,000 people on one day when it's free. So it was with that data and this kind of graph in mind that we entered into a process with EMC Arts, which is a consulting firm based in New York. It is really what was an adaptive planning and innovation process that had a number of different components. And this is kind of a graph that takes you through the steps, the first phase of which is an adaptive capacity assessment that we undertook in fall of 2014. And it's really a diagnostic process that we undertook with with two groups of stakeholders. One was a very large group consisting of staff, board, external members, a number of people. There were about 30 people involved in that. And really the question that that group looked at was, what was the Art Gallery of Alberta, and also questioning our long-held assumptions. So assumptions about what do we assume about ourselves, our audiences, what are the patterns that we follow, what restricts us, what's changing in the environment around us, what do we control, and what do we learn from our community, and how adaptable are we? Phase two was a smaller innovation team, which consisted of 12 people only, board members. There were 3 staff, 3 board, 3 external. Actually, no, 4 board, 4 staff, 4 external people to bring up to 12. We actually met here in Banff for about 5 days, and we developed some transformational objectives for the organization that then we used to design some prototypes for experimentation to kind of answer some questions. So our transformational objectives were that we will create generations of Edmontonians and Albertans who know, learn, and care about art and how it holds meaning in their lives, to recognize everyone as a member and exponentially increase engagement, and to expand our presence and relevance in the city of Edmonton and across Alberta. And so we then set into this kind of prototyping process, and what was really nice about this process is it created an environment where we could experiment and potentially succeed or fail, but also enabled us to ask and answer very specific questions. So we developed prototypes to determine to what extent is cost a barrier in terms of admission and attendance, to what extent is time a barrier in terms of our operational hours, how do we engage with youth, and that ties back to that kind of objective of engaging generations, and how do we address the question of relevance and the question of that, is this for me, which is really about the relationship to program. So I'm going to focus on some of the prototypes that we developed, and this is just kind of giving you highlights of very specific things that we've done. And a lot of the things we did are not new. I think many of you who are in the museum or art gallery world will have heard of things, institutions doing things like this. But what for us was very new and very transformative is that it all happened at the same time. So simultaneous change to admissions, to programs, to marketing, and so it was cross-departmental and quite dramatic. So the first ones we were prototyping were about admissions and hours. We made admission free for all youth under 18 and all Alberta students. So any student registered in any type of educational institution in Alberta, whether that would be post-secondary, universities, colleges, any student of any age is free, as is any student under 18. And again, that ties back to the question of generations of Albertans. And we created a youth council who are called the Hive, or they self-titled themselves the Hive. And they organize their own activities, which are called Swarm. So there is now the AGA Swarm events that happen. And all of those things are youth-directed. We have free admission days now. We have about 6 a year: Family Day, National Indigenous Peoples Day, Canada Day, usually if it's over a weekend for the whole weekend, and the Alberta Culture Day is weekend. And then to talk about the question of hours as well as cost, we made admission free. We added 2 evenings, Tuesday and Wednesday evenings from 5 to 8. The gallery is now open, and we're free admission during those hours. So not only did we create more opportunities for people that work during the day to attend the gallery, but we also made it free during those times. But some other ideas that we tried to, oh, it went off. Oh no, okay, I'll go quickly. Some other ideas that, dang, look at that. Time flies when you're up here. Was to look at the museum as a place of creative production, not just as a place where we present finished things. To look at artists as problem solvers and to share artistic process. And one of the things we were thinking about in terms of defining relevance is that for a lot of people, they don't really understand the artistic process when it comes to working artists and how they make paintings or how things happen. We wanted to create community as meaning makers, audience as participants in creative process, which I think a lot of what we were talking about this morning is there. Oh, and language as another possible barrier. It's supposed to say language as a barrier. So we did something called Charette, Roulette, which was part of our Pool Center of Design programming, in which the gallery space got transformed into a workshop. And in this case, this is an artist named Paul Seegers, who is interviewing audience members, and they, oh, that's the alarm. Okay, good. So he interviews audience members, they tell him of a certain problem that they have, and then he designs a solution. And then this local design firm called Oliver Apartment builds an object to help solve their problem. And as an example of that, here, this device that's standing up at the top, a man came in and said that he felt that he was losing connection with his son and that they didn't speak anymore and they didn't spend time together. So he built this object, and every day they have to spend 10 minutes looking face to face through this thing and communicating. So a number of objects actually kind of helped to design. So it was really about the artist as a problem solver and a designer. There was the fabric workshop, in which we turned the gallery into a working fabric studio where people came and made things. It also became, there was a group of knitters in Edmonton who kind of moved into the gallery, and they would have all their knitting happening in the gallery. And so there's ideas, and there was tea and things. And then we worked with a publication studio from Vancouver who did turn the gallery space into a print studio. And we did workshops in writing workshops, bookbinding workshops, and people came and could just sit down and make books. And then from that, it evolved into Workroom, which is where artists take over the gallery space and they work in it for as long as they need until they finish their exhibition. And then the exhibition is public, but the difference being that the whole creation process is public. The whole installation is public. It kind of, everything happens. And so there's another version of that. And the other thing that was happening at the same time is we were At the gallery, since I've been there since 1997, we've been doing a lot of work with Indigenous artists. But what became clear was that there was a lot of Indigenous artists in our community who were doing work and didn't have a place to show it. And so Otsitziwan Curatorial Collective is a relatively new collective in Edmonton of Indigenous curators who were working on an exhibition of Dwayne and Tanya Linkletter, but they didn't have a venue for it. So we kind of created a space, gave them the space, gave them the money, and they created the exhibition. And then we followed that up. We invited, actually, Otsitziwan to come into the AGA as curators in residence, and they turned us down. So, but I know they want to be independent, so that's good. Yeah. But they did know of another project that didn't have a home, which is Lisa Lay, which is being curated by Amy Malbuff and Jessie Ray Short, which is the first ever exhibition in Canada to look specifically at contemporary Métis art. So we then gave Jessie and Amy a big space and a budget, and they're producing the show, which will open in May. So maybe I should stop. We also have, in terms of the idea of community as meaning makers, I'll stop. We have community-led tours, so we work with different organizations who create, they do all the interpretation for exhibitions and interpret the exhibitions from different perspectives. And for our Canadian History Project, this is where we come into language. We produced everything in 8 languages, so we're now producing interpretive content in these 8 languages, which are the kind of 8 languages in Edmonton, and I'll stop there. Anyway, I think that's it. There's some things.